Welcome to Agriculture Today. We're glad to have you aboard. K-State Research and Extension has just released, for the benefit of you winter wheat producers in Kansas, the annual Wheat Variety Disease and Insect Ratings. Two of the authors of this publication are with us now. Romulo Lollato is a wheat production specialist with K-State. Erick DeWolf is wheat disease specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Romulo, just a quick and broad overview of this publication, which K-State has provided for years upon years now, but this is getting into the specifics of varietal performance with respect to diseases and insects, right?
Hi, Eric. Yes, thanks for having us on air here today. So historically, K-State has produced this report on a yearly basis and historically looking at disease ratings and insect ratings. Starting last year, we updated that and we added some agronomic characteristics as well. So in addition to those insects and disease ratings, now producers also have access to some agronomic characteristics such as variety maturity, variety straw strength. We're going to add some other agronomics as well, such as low soil pH. So producers have that resource now not only to look at diseases and insects, but also some of the other things that they need to fit within their growing system.
Valuable information here. Eric, you might expand on how this is all accumulated. The field tests gather this information, and then it takes a bit of compiling to pull this all together, right?
It sure does. So both Romulo and I will spend a lot of time in the field, as you know, in April, May, and June, doing a lot of wheat variety demonstration plots and evaluating some of the wheat variety performance tests around the state. And it's from those observations from this year and then also some of the preceding years that we enter all that information into an overall database, and then from that create summaries that ultimately are presented in the publication that growers have access to. So there's just years and years and hundreds of observations that go behind each one of the numbers that's ultimately presented in this table or in the summary information.
This publication is so loaded we hardly could go through all of the information provided in it, but I want to ask each of you what parts of the publication or what information within it would you like to see producers really pay attention to for the upcoming growing season based on what we saw with this really unusual growing season in 2017. Romulo?
Well, Eric, from the perspective of agronomic and agronomic practices there in production, I think some of the things that producers should be looking at, one of the things is the straw strength. So we do have that information out. Producers are constantly asking me about growth regulators, and those help in reducing lodging. And what I say is that those are variable, right? The results are pretty variable, but choosing a variety with a good straw strength, that's the first step. So if you have a field that is a very high fertility, bottom ground, and you generally have lodging concerns, definitely make good use of that information that we're putting out and choose a variety with a good straw strength.
You've identified that specifically in the agronomic characteristics part, right?
Exactly. So we have those ratings that we took throughout the state for a couple of years now. Eric has a larger database than that. Another important characteristic, and maybe even more important, would be drought tolerance as well, right? Especially as we head west, we have some ratings on drought tolerance for those varieties based on both observations along the years, but also taking a look at some of the yield data and how these varieties are performing on those very low yielding years. So that drought tolerance as well would be a very important factor that producers should be looking at. Another thing that we have on the agronomics that would probably be my third one that I would suggest would be variety maturity. And when I talk about variety maturity, generally I like to say the producers should spread their risk. So not planting everything to an early maturity wheat that is going to be more exposed to a spring freeze. Not plant everything to a late maturing wheat that's going to be more exposed to heat late in the growing season. So really spread that risk in getting varieties with different maturities. So maybe part of the acres to an early maturing wheat, part of a medium maturing wheat, and part to a medium late maturing wheat. It's always a safe bet there to spread the risk in the farm.
So, Eric, same question. What would you suggest producers focus on as they look at this publication from the disease resistance standpoint? And, of course, diseases were headliners in 2017's crop.
Well, I think the temptation for me is often to focus on the single disease that hurt me the most this last year. So last year we know that wheat streak mosaic or stripe rust were major problems for us. So those are going to be priorities, but you don't want to just focus just solely on that because you can unknowingly kind of get yourself into a bottleneck where you're really limiting the number of varieties and open yourself up to some vulnerabilities that you didn't anticipate just because you're so focused on a single problem. So what I usually suggest people do is think a little more broadly about what are historically some of the more important diseases in your area. So out west, stripe rust and wheat streak mosaic are going to be some of the top priorities, but I would also add leaf rust in there as well as a priority. And I think we hadn't seen leaf rust for a few years, and some people were a little surprised this year when they did find that their varieties did have some vulnerability to leaf rust that they didn't anticipate based on their previous year's experience. But that information is available in this publication, and they can kind of balance those risks for all three of those hazards. As you move into central Kansas, I think it becomes a little bit more an issue of which variety to pick because there's more and more hazards, there's more and more diseases that the growers in central Kansas have to deal with. So, for example, we might begin to prioritize or make sure we have varieties that have resistance to soil-borne mosaic, for example, and spindle streak. Those diseases are fairly rare in western Kansas, but very common in central Kansas. We might also add barley yellow dwarf to that list as well, and tan spot or some of the septoria complex, powdery mildew, fusarium head blight in the far southeast portion of the state. So you can begin to get an idea the risk that you have from the entire spectrum of diseases can also play into that as well. So I usually suggest growers think about it regionally. What are the important diseases for their parts of the state? And then begin to set priorities, complementing the yield performance test results that they get, of course. But wherever possible, pick up resistance to as many of the important diseases as possible.
With the emphasis, again, on historical trends, not a snapshot of a one-year outbreak of, say, wheat streak mosaic, for instance.
Exactly. Yeah, I think you don't want to just focus on just the disease that hurt you the most just this last year. Try and look at the historical trends of what's important in your area. And the publication does include some figures and a small amount of text to summarize which are those important diseases, just to help summarize that from a historic perspective for growers as well.
Very good. And Romulo, this publication is designed to complement the wheat variety performance test report, which is also out now. You want to see producers use these in combination.
Definitely, Eric. And I appreciate that Erick DeWolf here brought the issue from a perspective of location within the state, so regional perspective there, because when you look at variety selection from a regional standpoint, some of the other things that producers might be looking for as we go west, for example, is production of straw in the end of the season as well, right? So many producers look at tall varieties out west because they are looking for that residue and for the no-till and helping conserve moisture in the soil. So we also provide that estimate of height, or at least a relative height of all of these varieties in this publication. And we're also looking into some of the new traits, or we're collecting data to provide about new traits here in the future, which are also regional specific. So, for example, we're looking at low soil pH, so acid soils and how varieties perform in acid soils. Well, here in a few years, once we start getting quite a bit of data in and we have more confidence in those numbers, we're going to release those numbers as well. Out west, coleoptile length. So Eric and I have been discussing and doing some preliminary measurements on coleoptile length, seed size, and whatnot. So these things that are important on producers' field specific and regional specific. But definitely, as you mentioned, we also highly recommend producers to be looking at the results of the performance tests in their regions. Because in the end of the day, yield is what we're looking for, and then we need to choose a variety that has a good yield potential, and in addition, complement that yield potential with these traits of interest of each one of these varieties. Whenever producers are looking in K-State performance tests or other performance tests, Colorado State, it's always important to see and check how that test was managed, because if the test was received or did not receive a foliar fungicide application, that's going to really impact the yields on those varieties. So try to see if you can find a trial that has been managed close to what you manage your own farm. So that's also important to see how those varieties are performing in a management that resembles what you do in your own farm.
Well, this publication continues to broaden its scope in providing valuable information to wheat growers as they settle on their seed selections for another growing season. It can be found at the K-State Research and Extension bookstore online. That is at ksre.ksu.edu/bookstore. You can also access it through the websites for the departments of agronomy and plant pathology, respectively, at K-State. Use your search engine appropriately there, or ask your local extension agricultural agent about these ratings. And gentlemen, as always, excellent work in pulling all of this together. Thanks for taking the time to talk about it with us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Eric.
K-State's Romulo Lollato and Erick DeWolf with us, wheat production specialist and wheat disease specialist, respectively, on the just-released 2017 Wheat Variety Disease and Insect Ratings from Kansas State University. We'll be back with more. This is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever wondered why livestock producers burn Kansas pasture? Here's the deal. Controlled burning helps preserve the prairie and allows every bite feeder cattle eat to be the most nutritious. National Wildlife and Parks also feel it is a necessity to help with wildlife populations.
So the next time you see a Kansas pasture burning, know it's for the good of our wildlife, our prairie, and our livestock. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and more for you now, as was observed at a special and important conference on precision agriculture that took place recently in Scotland, the European Conference on Precision Agriculture by title. Another of the attendees from K-State is with us now. She's a weed ecologist out of the Department of Agronomy here at the university, Anita Dille, and we wanted her to come by and share some of her thoughts on what stood out in regard to precision ag approaches to crop management. Tell us about this experience, Anita. There was a great deal of expertise shared at this conference, was there not?
Yes, it was a lot of fun to be able to go to Scotland and to see sort of what's going on in the European continent with regards to precision agriculture. Compared to what we see in the Midwest part of the United States, a lot more crop diversity. The kinds of crops that they are working precision ag tools in was really different. And so it's fun to hear and maybe see how these tools are used in different places and how can we then bring it back and maybe use it in our own scenarios. And it was broad in topic. It wasn't just weed science, but crop protection. So looking at how can we manage diseases and insects as well as weeds, crop inputs. And also just how do we make observations of fields? And so what are the tools that people are using, like drones or satellite imagery or sensing on the go in the fields? And so it was just interesting really to hear the diversity of practices that people are using and to see it from a European perspective.
And there's a slew of stuff going on in this area of crop protection, isn't there?
Yes, there is. With those crops that they are looking at, a lot of them have higher value, and so there's really a pressure to make sure that they're managing those diseases or insects or even the weeds. And so it was interesting to see a lot of work in vineyards from Spain, for example, or in olive orchards from Greece or in France. And so just to think of some different crops and how we might be able to use them for us here. The opportunity for me to go there was myself as well as my graduate student, Garrison Gundy, presented some of the research work that he's conducting here in Kansas, and to share that with the audience there, Garrison gave a presentation on using variable rate soil-applied herbicides. And so can we sense fields for different soil properties like texture and organic matter, even pH? And can we use that then to optimize the right herbicide rate for soil-applied pre-emergence herbicides to do a good job of weed control, but not to put too much on so that we end up with environmental problems or, make it more expensive but still be successful in weed control. And he's been working on that in 2016 and this year, 2017, in corn and sorghum. And so he presented some of his results from last year's work in sorghum. And we're finding that we can reduce herbicide rates to be effective for weed control, especially with concerns like Palmer amaranth, whether it is resistant or not resistant. It's a weed that we see in a lot of our corn and sorghum fields. So how can we use our soil-applied herbicides effectively and know that we're getting good control in those environments? And then a follow-up to that work is we can go out and visually inspect that we're getting good weed control, but it's a lot easier if you could fly it with a drone. And so we're working together with Ray Acevedo in our department, our Precision Ag faculty member, and he's been flying lots of different fields, and we are using that technology to then also see how quickly can we observe these weeds that may be escaping or, getting missed by the different herbicides, and being able to use that tool and technology then to make post-emergence weed control decisions. So Garrison's study is really focused just on the soil applied side. How well does that work? And then we're adding this other component. And so I presented that as a poster at the meeting as well. So we had those two presentations from the weed science group from our agronomy department.
But on both counts, it sounds like headway is being made and the technologies are paying off.
Right. We can really see that there is a benefit. If a field has variability, then you know that you can make those kind of decisions, good agronomic decisions, and still get adequate, for us, weed control in those situations. And so that's exciting, so that we can optimize that for our growers.
It is ongoing work then to point out, correct?
Correct. Garrison's work was really investigating sort of the practical side of it. It's generating a lot more questions maybe than final answers, but we wanted to know, is it something that, a grower could implement relatively quickly? So that was a lot of fun. And that's what I found interesting at the Precision Ag Conference, that there is still a lot of tools being developed, but not always the decisions of how you use that information to put it into the field. So I'm excited that we really do look at that component and how do you take those tools and actually apply them into good agronomic decisions.
You talk about this, what you call disconnect between the capabilities of the technology and the actual agronomic application of that information. Did you get a sense, listening to the presentations there, that the gap is being bridged decently?
It's getting narrower. I still think that you've got the engineers that are working on the tools, and then you got the agronomists that are trying to make those decisions, and sometimes we're still needing to get that person in between to connect us. So I still think we got a few steps to go, but it's getting a little better.
Anita, you also say that there was a great deal of attention paid at this conference to what autonomous technology can allow. Tell us what you saw and what caught your eye in particular.
So, there was several presentations about robots and just how they can program the robots to be able to, say, move autonomously through an orchard or a vineyard and sense then, say, the trunk of a plant and know that that's the crop that they want to protect, and then being able to sense other things in between and being able to drive and do that efficiently down the row and turn around and come back. And so there's still a lot of development on that technology of how to be autonomous, especially in these high-value crops, and to then be able to take that information and be able to put anything else onto that particular piece of equipment to then do pest management or other agronomic kind of management. So it was just really fascinating just to see the detail that would go in and how well we can design those kind of pieces of equipment to actually accomplish something. Another interesting study, we don't see a lot of that here, but someone was looking at how to more efficiently drop down each of the shovels of a moldboard plow so that you don't get the big triangle at the start or an end of a run, but that you could square that off better. And so just the interesting engineering that goes behind thinking of how do you make something more effective and autonomous and individually controlled. And so that's what a lot of the ideas were that were being shared there as well.
Really, the navigation aspect of these vehicles has been conquered by and large. It's the matter of what those can do from here forward in terms of tillage or precision application of pest control or harvest, for that matter.
Correct. We've got the good positioning systems that, they can run through the field on their own. So again, how do we now use that really effectively in our fields with good agronomics? Any
feel how long it'll be before this technology actually advances to a wide adoption?
I think it's still a little ways away. A lot of these were really prototype sort of things. And so I know some of the companies have, fully autonomous vehicles. Those are the things that are rapidly adopted. The auto steer, the auto shutoffs on booms, and just the efficiencies that's given us has been tremendous. And so now it's plugging that decision into there beyond just the sort of that automation.
So it may be coming, but it's not imminent.
Correct.
Quite yet. But it sounds like you took away a great deal of information that might well be, again, applied here in U.S. crop production systems, although the European crop type may be considerably different.
Right. And so that's the fun part of sharing our different ideas of, how maybe in our agronomic system, we see these large broad acre crops being managed with larger equipment and types of ability to make decisions. One example was a colleague from Denmark, and they have combined very detailed by weed species, by herbicide product, by environmental conditions, exactly what rate you could spray for that particular weed. Whereas in our environment, you're trying to cover so many acres, and especially in Kansas, we don't have always the greatest weather conditions, and so you want to hedge your bets and make sure you're putting the right product on at the best rate or the labeled rate, rather than being very flexible in that. And so there's a different perspective there, but we can get ideas from both on how to make some of these precision ag systems work better. And
lastly, any inspirations for potential research that you might oversee here at K-State that you drew from the conference?
Again, we're really interested in how we can move forward on drone imagery to do weed scouting from the air, in the sense that how soon can we see these weeds? Can we even get them identified? Can we fly a drone through a field, and by the time it lands, a farmer may have something already on their iPad or their phone as a weed map that just tells them really quickly what's going on. What's been so great, prior to this, satellite imagery would average a picture over a very large area. You wouldn't necessarily find a weed in a 30 by 30 foot square area because it was lost in that image. And now we're getting down to the point that these drones can sense plants because you're observing a 1 centimeter square area on the ground. But the question is, do I really need to know exactly what it is, or just know that I have a weed, or that I can go and quickly make a decision that, yes, I've got weeds and now I need to react?
Well, it's still amazing possibilities.
Oh, yeah. So I think we're really looking at how can we use that technology, those drones, to do a better job of, say, weed scouting and help people cover more acres in a more efficient manner.
Well, good luck in continuing that research pursuit here at K-State. And we do appreciate your reflections on this conference that was just completed in Scotland. Anita, thanks for coming over.
You're welcome.
She's a weed ecologist in K-State's Department of Agronomy, is Anita Dille. She was a participant in the European Conference on Precision Agriculture, which took place just a couple of weeks back in Scotland. And you're listening to Agriculture Today. We'll return shortly on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. On now to today's agricultural news headlines for you. These courtesy in part of DTN. Well, Japan will discuss the imposition of emergency tariffs on frozen beef imports with the United States under a bilateral economic dialogue, according to Japan Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso. His remarks came after Japan raised tariffs on frozen beef from the U.S. and other countries from the current 38.5% to 50% until next March, after their imports surged. Under WTO rules, Japan can introduce safeguard tariffs when imports grow more than 17% in a quarter on a year-on-year basis. ASO said there is room for consideration as to whether that time span should be reviewed. He added that the safeguard would not have been triggered if the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement had taken effect. Japan was reportedly planning to abolish that safeguard mechanism if the U.S. would have adopted the TPP. Now, USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue has warned that the imposition of higher tariffs would harm our import bilateral trade relationship with the country of Japan. The National Grain and Feed Association and the North American Export Grain Association submitted a joint statement to the Trump administration this week regarding the performance of free trade agreements, responding to a request for comments from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and the U.S. Department of Commerce. The associations identified opportunities to update and modernize U.S. free trade agreements and highlighted the urgency in initiating trade negotiations with key Asia-Pacific markets. Withdrawing from the TPP trade agreement, they said, has created a void that foreign export competitors are aggressively exploiting to the detriment of U.S. agricultural exports and our nation's economy, as they wrote in their letter. Now, the two groups say key areas that would preserve and enhance U.S. agricultural competitiveness and facilitate trade include not only expanded market access and tariff concessions, but also improved regulatory consistency and cooperation and removal of non-tariff barriers that lack scientific merit, among other objectives. Directions on use of the chemical dicamba are now being reviewed in the wake of hundreds of reports of crop damage from chemical drift. That from a spokesperson for the Environmental Protection Agency, as confirmed to Reuters. EPA approved new formulations of dicamba late last year for 2 years, as older formulations were known to drift from their initial target field. Scores of states are investigating damage reports from dicamba, and some states, as you know, have taken action to either bar its use or set restrictions on conditions under which it can be used. And yesterday, President Trump endorsed legislation to change the U.S. immigration system and reduce the number of legal immigrants coming into the country, as well as emphasize highly educated immigrants over what are regarded as the low-skilled laborers, which could be interpreted to mean those in agriculture. Trump hosted Republican Senators Tom Cotton of Arkansas and David Perdue of Georgia at the White House to tout their bill. The Cotton-Perdue bill does not seem to have much of a chance of enactment as written. Most Democrats and some Republicans will oppose it, particularly in the Senate, but it may start a conversation that could lead to changes in immigration law. The bill does not specifically target the H-2A program that brings in temporary agricultural workers, but the bill would have implications for illegal immigrants who may try to qualify for permanent residency and for the prospect of bringing in workers in the livestock and dairy industries, which do need year-round workers. Now, agriculture was not mentioned at that White House ceremony. Most farm groups did not respond to requests from DTN for comment immediately after that announcement. However, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina stated that the Cotton-Perdue bill would hurt industries such as agriculture and tourism. He said he's always supported merit-based immigration, but Graham said, quoting here, "Unfortunately, the other part of this proposal would reduce legal immigration by half, including many immigrants who work legally in our agriculture, tourism, and service industries," in his words. Now, the American Farm Bureau Federation official in charge of its administration portfolio, Paul Schlegel, told DTN that the Cotton-Perdue bill does not address Farm Bureau's priorities of establishing a legal program to bring workers into the U.S. or provide legal status for current undocumented workers. U.S. farmers rely on undocumented workers because the current system, he says, is broken and does not provide a system for bringing those workers into the country. Now it's on to this week's Kansas Soybean Update for you. Here's Greg Akagi.
Susan Sankey, General Manager of the Kansas State Fair, is joining us. And Susan, soybean producers still have time to enter the Soybean Plant Show competition at the Kansas State Fair, and it's being sponsored by the Kansas Soybean Commission. So what's the deadline, and how can producers enter that competition?
The deadline for this year's entries is August 15th. But people can still enter even after that date with a fee. But if they enter between now and August 15th, it's at no cost.
With this being the Soybean Plant Show, are there any suggestions on how farmers should choose their individual soybean plants?
Well, there are a couple of suggestions that have come from the Agriculture Superintendent for the State Fair. And those recommendations are to select the more mature plants, to consider taller plants with the most pods, and those that are free from any insect damage and disease, and no off-colored leaves, and plants that are uniform in pod size and fill that's uniform.
You'll have 4 different categories based on the maturity levels?
Correct. There are 4 classes that are offered this year: the Maturity Class 2, Maturity Class 3, Maturity Class 4, and 5.
And as always, there will be cash awards for the top placers.
We've got premiums awarded for the division of first, which is $30, the second place, $25, third place, which is $20, and then fourth, $15, and then the overall champion of the division will receive $100, and we're grateful for the sponsorship from the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Do you happen to know when those will be judged?
Usually the entries that come in before the fair, and we try to have everything judged on that first day, which is September the 8th.
If people want more information about that, want to enter, and obviously they can do that after the August 15th deadline, what's the best way they can do that?
Well, the best way to do it is to go to the website, kansasstatefair.com, and click on the information for the competition. They can also call the State Fair at 620-669-3600 and talk to somebody in competitive exhibits who can give them all the details and guidelines on how to enter.
And how important is it to have sponsorships like the Kansas Soybean Commission doing a specific contest like this?
We can only do these things because of the support that the State Fair gets from the partners and the people that we work with. So the sponsorship by the Kansas Soybean Commission is really important to help promote that industry in Kansas and to keep that level of interest high and to make sure that we get good entries. But it's really due to the sponsorships that we have and the partnerships to make that possible.
Susan, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.
Susan Sankey, General Manager of the Kansas State Fair, joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg. And this is Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Coming your way now on this Agriculture Today, our weekly segment on horticulture. Ward Upham joining us. He's a horticulturist with K-State Research and Extension. Ward, some of the more durable flowers we see in Kansas, the iris, they're very popular, all kinds of colorful arrays that they provide to the home landscape, and now is the time, you say, or nearing so, to divide iris, right?
That's right. You know, we have hard growing conditions in Kansas.
Right.
So there's a lot of plants that don't do well, but iris is one of those that really does well in our environment. If you find an old farmstead, usually what you're going to see are the iris are still there and maybe an old pear tree is still there. Most other plants just don't make it when they're left in that type of condition. So we're going to divide them about this time of year. And the reason for that is that they take a while in order to get established, and they're planted really shallow, and they're shallow-rooted anyway. So we need to give those roots enough time to get down into the ground and hold the plant so that when we get the freezing and thawing over winter, it doesn't just lift the plant out of the ground. Mm-hmm. You know, things like peonies and daylilies, you usually divide those in September. But iris, it's better to do it a little bit earlier. Really, any time during August is okay. But I actually prefer earlier August than later August.
And before we get into technique, iris should be divided every few years anyway, right?
That's right. About every 3 to 5 years is about right. And so that rejuvenates the planting and keeps them from getting too crowded.
Well, how to do it, and starting by digging iris, and before you divide them actually, anything that folks need to pay particular attention to here?
Really, they're easy to dig. And so that's not usually a problem. When you get them up out of the ground, then you have to decide what you're going to keep. Mm-hmm. And what you'll find are what we call single fans and double fans. You're going to have to cut them apart to get that. But if you have a single fan, you'll have a leaf that's connected to one rhizome. If you have a double fan, what you have are 2 rhizomes hooked together to another larger rhizome. On the end of those 2 rhizomes are the leaves. And so you actually have 2 plants together in what we call a double fan. They are actually preferred because there's more storage energy within those rhizomes to get it off to a good start. But the single fans are fine. Just takes a little bit longer for them to get established.
And you would dig both the same method, very simple to pull up.
Yes, and they're not hard to cut apart. You will have to cut them apart, but that's not difficult to do. Not like daylilies. Daylilies are much more of a challenge.
But then once you've dug those up, you want folks to sort for quality and potential problems that might exist.
That's right. Look for any signs of holes in those rhizomes. That's going to be a sign of iris borer. Or any that are soft, that's going to be a sign of soft rot. And so if you have a lot of iris, if you find any that are like that, just throw them out. Don't worry about it. If you really want to save them, if you have holes in them, just stick a wire in there, make sure you get that borer killed. If they're soft, cut off that soft portion to get into good part of that rhizome. Dip them in a 10% bleach solution, wash them off, let them dry, and then you can plant them.
And that'll take care of the soft rot.
That should take care of the soft rot. Just make sure you actually get into good, solid material rather than that soft stuff. It's a bacterial disease. If you get into it, you're going to notice it because it doesn't smell good.
So take due note of that, and you can salvage that iris rhizome in that manner. Then the planting specifications, and this is fairly simple to execute.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be terribly deep. You can go 6 inches deep. That's going to be enough for iris. If you're planting a tree, you probably want to go 12. And so just work up the soil and add your fertilizer. Best to have a soil test done, but if you don't, about a pound of 10-10-10 per 100 square feet would be about right. And make sure that gets well mixed into the soil because the phosphorus and potassium don't move well, and so they need to be mixed in. And then when you get ready to plant those, cut those leaves back by about 2/3. Take 2/3 of that leaf off, easier to handle, and then it's not likely to be caught in the wind and pulled out of that soil. And they're pretty much dormant. That top part's pretty much dormant anyway. It's not going to hurt them any. Then you want to place them, and usually put them in a placement of 3. It could be 3 double fans, 3 single fans, or any mixture of all of those. And you put the rhizomes so that they're pointing toward the center of what is like a circle. And so the leaves are pointing out because that rhizome or that plant as it grows is going to push those leaves further and further away from that rhizome.
You don't want them growing into each other then.
That's right. You want them to grow out from each other. And that way you'll be able to go that 3 to 5 years before you have to divide them again. After that, just make sure you keep them watered. And not a bad idea to go ahead and mulch them that first year. You want that cold temperature again over the winter where you get that freezing and thawing. That helps moderate that so you're less likely to get those plants lifted out of the ground.
Once more, though, you're talking about a shallow planting. You can, in fact, plant iris divisions too deep?
You could. Now, you'll be able to tell where the soil hit that plant originally. Actually, I've seen iris where that rhizome is actually visible on top of the ground. So you're not burying it very deep. You do want to cover the rhizome, but it doesn't have to have much soil on top of it. And so that will give it then enough time to get those roots down and get it placed well.
And folks, if they divide iris and replant them here the next few weeks, they can expect a bloom come springtime?
We hope. If it's a double fan, you're more likely to get a bloom than you will with a single fan just because it has more energy. But being disturbed like it is, it takes energy for it in order to get well established again. So you may skip a year or you may not, but after 2 years, you'll for sure get bloom.
Once more, this is a healthy management step for iris beds to divide them every so often, Ward. So if folks haven't touched those beds for a while, it'd be a good idea to do this.
Yes, it will.
Appreciate your time, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
You bet.
Some guidelines there on dividing iris. Ward Upham with us, horticulturist, K-State Research and Extension, and we'd remind you once again that he mans the K-State Horticulture Rapid Response Center. You can call him with your questions directly at 785-532-1438, 785-532-1438. Ward's been our guest on this week's K-State Horticulture segment. Well, looking ahead to tomorrow's broadcast, we'll hear once again from K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. He'll offer up his weekly analysis of the grain trading trends. And we'll talk with K-State's Monty Vandeveer about some of the newer crop insurance tools that you producers have at your disposal. He'll be highlighting those at the upcoming Risk and Profit Conference here at K-State. And, of course, we'll welcome in for her weekly visit K-State climatologist Mary Knapp on Kansas agricultural weather. Those items and more on tomorrow's agenda. Please be back with us then, won't you? Until then, a good day to you. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.